All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Helder Ferreira. I am the Interim Director of the European Anti-Poverty Network. And on behalf of EAPN, I would like to invite you to welcome you to this event, COVID-19 Supercharging Poverty, Data and Experiences from the Ground. We will launch and discuss our EU Poverty Watch report in this event. And our main objectives are to discuss the key trends and recommendations on poverty in Europe with EU-level decision makers and explore solutions in the current EU political context. And another objective is to share EAPN members' analysis of the impact of COVID-19 on poverty through Europe with EU-level decision makers and stakeholders. Our EU Poverty Watch report was developed with a very significant contribution from our members, either national networks and European organizations as well. And it's the crucial participation and involvement of people with direct experiences of poverty and social exclusion. Many of them will be participating today in this event, and I wish to thank them for their presence. I would also like to thank members of the European Parliament, Cindy Franson and Marisa Matias from the European Parliament Intergroup Fighting Against Poverty for their ongoing support and for joining us today as co-hosts of this event. Thank you also to Katarina Ivankovic-Knezevic, Director of Social Affairs in the DG Employment, for joining us. Last but not least, our gratitude to all of you that decided to join us to attend this event and contribute to this discussion, the media, academics, representatives of local, regional, or national governments, European institutions, and so on. I will start by presenting the housekeeping rules.
You're muted, Helder.
I was muted all the time.
Just the past 5 seconds.
Okay. So I will start to remember that we are on a Zoom event and it's being live streamed. So I would remember all that you can select English or French with the interpretation button. Colleagues will speak in French, Portuguese, and Slovenian in session 2. But to access the interpretation in English and French, use the interpretation button. Please keep yourselves muted and videos off except when speaking to the event. And then you can also unmute when addressing and making questions. If you wish not to be recorded, please keep your video off. Rename yourself using your full name. You have an icon on the right of your screen, and add your organization if you like. The event hashtag is Poverty Watch, and details will be put in the chat. And for the discussion session, please write your questions in the chat in advance or during the sessions. The raise hand function in the bottom right icon can be used, but it's easier to see all of the questions in the chat. So please use them. And I think this is the main housekeeping messages that I wanted to highlight so we can organize our work today. Please, I want you to please give the attention now to the first speaker of the event. I will invite Cindy Franson to join us and to do the introduction component of the event. Please.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the entire intergroup Fighting Against Poverty, it is really a pleasure to us to welcome you on the launch of this Poverty Watch. I would like to express a sincere thank you to EAPN for the organization of this webinar and for inviting us to give the introduction to this event. The Poverty Watch is an important document as it states key trends on poverty in Europe, raises awarenesses on priority issues and proposes concrete recommendations to policymakers. We need this. We really need this. And what's particularly special about Poverty Watch is that it pays attention to the experiences of people confronted with poverty themselves. Also during today, and some people experiencing poverty will share their views with us. So thank you very much for doing this. And too often policies are made without contribution, without the participation of people who will be impacted by those policies. And during COVID-19 crisis, the fight against poverty becomes particularly pressing. And according to the 2020 Strategic Foresight report, the pandemic is expected to cause an increase of 4.8% in the at-risk of poverty rate, bringing the number of people to 130 million people. Furthermore, the devastating effects of the crisis are unequally distributed, as is also confirmed in the report that will be presented today. And the pandemic hits the most vulnerable groups hardest, increasing existing inequalities and pushing additional persons into poverty. And this is unacceptable. This is an unacceptable fact. The EU cannot just ignore. A real social Europe cannot shift the burdens of this crisis to women and single parent families, not to people with disabilities or ethnic minorities, and not to the youth or the elderly. And if we want to tackle poverty, we must address unemployment. Having a job, of course, is not a full guarantee against poverty. We know that. But having an income at least can diminish chances to end up in poverty. And in the past year, the European Union already took some actions to mitigate the devastating consequences of the pandemic. In May 2020, the SURE instrument was adopted to provide member states with loans to finance short-time work schemes and similar measures. In addition, a reinforced youth guarantee was adopted in October 2020 to tackle unemployment amongst young people, a group particularly affected by the pandemic. And the age limits of the previous youth guarantee was extended from 25 years to 29 years in order to support more young people in finding a job, following education, or doing a traineeship. Jobs, however, must also be decent. In 2018, almost 20 million workers in the EU were living in households at risk of poverty. And this number is expected to increase due to the crisis. Tackling poverty, this also means tackling in-work poverty. Important in this regard is the initiative of the European Commission for a directive on minimum wages, which the European Parliament will discuss in more detail there. We must make sure that the final directive guarantees for all workers a minimum wage that is above the poverty threshold. To quote President von der Leyen herself, minimum wages work, and it is time that work paid. Another crucial aspect of the fight against poverty is the full implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. This instrument provides a full social compass, recognizing, amongst others, the rights to affordable and qualitative healthcare, housing, and social protection. And this year, the European Commission will present an action plan to implement the pillar, and I hope the plan in the pipeline is an ambitious one. The European Parliament already paid attention to some aspects enshrined in the pillar. Just the plenary, for instance, was approving the increase in the portions of the for European aid to the most deprived. In addition, a motion for a resolution on decent affordable housing is adopted. And I want to congratulate our colleague Kim van Sparrenberg, who was in charge of this resolution. Going to end homelessness in the EU by 2030 is very important, and demanding the European Commission to present its proposal for a European collaboration platform on homelessness. Everyone should have a place to feel home, to feel at home. And there should be no place for homelessness in the EU. Nevertheless, housing must also be affordable, and housing costs should not lead to poverty. The renovation wave announced by the Commission can provide opportunities in this regard, since well-renovated houses will have decreased energy costs and can diminish energy poverty. A green transition and the fight against poverty can go hand in hand. I'm really convinced about this, but only if the green transition is also a just transition, if the most vulnerable people does not have to pay the price for it. Allow me to discuss one last aspect of the fight against poverty, the gender aspect. The 2020 Poverty Watch confirms that women are at greater risk of poverty than men, and are expected to be hit harder by the pandemic. Women are, for instance, more likely to be in a precarious job or have to carry the biggest workload at home. Last week, the European Parliament adopted 2 resolutions on gender equality, calling amongst others for considering the gender perspective when addressing the consequences of the COVID-19 crisis. The same must be done when fighting poverty. It is unacceptable that gender is in charge and determines your chances of ending poverty. Urgent action, for instance, is needed to close the gender pay gap. According to the last figures, women in the EU would earn on average 16% less than men, without any good explanation for this. And I hope the European Commission will come soon with an ambitious proposal on wage transparency as a first step towards closing the gender pay gap. And with the pandemic still raging in Europe, poverty levels expected to rise, it is safe to say that there is a lot of work to be done. I am hopeful to continue working with people experiencing poverty, with EAPN, and with useful information that is presented in the Poverty Watch report. The fight against poverty must stay high on the European political agenda, and I really want to thank you for this seminar, to organize this. I would like to give the floor now to Mrs. Anna Krozer, who will present you main findings of the EU Poverty Watch report. I wish you all an enriching event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cindy Franson, for framing in such a well and adequate and balanced way our discussions today, framing the existing policies, the challenges that we face, but also highlighting the participation of people experiencing poverty and the role they play in addressing and helping us to improve and address those challenges. I give now the floor to Anna Krozer. She's going to bring us the participation or the report, the Poverty Watch report, and present the main findings. Please, Anna.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Can everyone see my screen? Hopefully, yes. So I'm delighted to be presenting to you this afternoon the Poverty Watch 2020 report, which is one-of-a-kind work based on the poverty watches of our national networks and our European organization members. I will first introduce the Poverty Watch 2020 report itself. Then I will talk about the trends in poverty and social exclusion revealed by the report. Then I will touch upon the impact of COVID in the past year. Then I will talk about the challenges and priorities highlighted by our networks and European organizations. And I will finish with main messages and recommendations derived from the report. So first of all, what is the Poverty Watch and what is it not? It is not a comprehensive academic report. It starts from the reality of people experiencing poverty and the perspectives of NGOs that support and work with them. It aims to monitor key trends and policy on poverty and social exclusion. It aims to raise awareness, and it aims to propose concrete recommendations, as Ms. Franson said, to feed in to the decision-making process. We received 28 poverty watches last year from our national networks and European organization members, and the report is based on their work. It's a synthesis of their work. 2020 was not a normal year. So apart from the overall assessment of poverty trends and social exclusion trends, we have a priority thematic focus on the COVID response. It is very obvious from the report that the EU is at a turning point. Either we prioritize measures against poverty, or we allow poverty to rise to unimaginable and unacceptable levels, thereby supercharging poverty. So what is happening with poverty and inequality? According to 2019 data, so even before COVID, we had around 92 million people at risk of poverty. That is nearly 1 in 5. And based on the Commission's forecasts, this could rise to 125–130 million people as the effect of COVID takes place. Poverty is a multidimensional concept. It impacts different people in multiple ways. It is experienced as a series of lacks or deprivations of things that other people consider as normal. And not all groups face the same risk. We can see some of the groups, the vulnerable groups mentioned on this slide, but I draw your attention that the list is not exhaustive here. In the EU context, there is a widening gap between richer and poorer member states. 1 in 3 people is at risk of poverty in Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece. A job is not always out of the way out of poverty either. As Ms. Franson raised as well, 1 in 10 workers in the EU is working yet poor. In the Commission's estimate, social benefits play a crucial role, reducing poverty by nearly a third. However, there is still a long way to go to eradicate poverty. There are 4 main findings I would like to highlight in the COVID context. First of all, the crisis exposed the decline of the welfare states that were already weakened from the 2008 crisis and the following austerity responses and budget cuts. This is underlined by the increased demand for essential services for food and basic needs in the EU. For example, there is a massive increase in the use of food banks across the EU. Poverty is being supercharged. People who are already poor or belonging to vulnerable groups face the greatest risk of having their situation become worse during this crisis. Inequalities are also deepened due to the new costs and the loss of services, such as the increased heating and lighting costs since we are confined to our homes, the lack of computers for children learning from home, the homeless shelters being closed, or the free school meals not being provided because the schools are also closed. The longer-term impact of the crisis does not only harm the economy, but actually the health and the social inclusion of people experiencing poverty. An additional finding coming from these reports is that anybody can become poor. There are new groups of people pushed into poverty highlighted by the poverty watches. For example, the so-called NEETs, young people who are not in education, employment, or training. There is a strong consensus from the different poverty watches highlighting 2 main themes. One of them is the gaps in ensuring basic social and economic rights to a decent income, quality jobs and services such as housing, education, health and care, energy, and social protection for all. And there is a lack of personalized, comprehensive support, where NGOs have to fill the gap, who are themselves threatened by funding cuts and other issues that I will mention later. So we have 10 key messages derived from the report. The first is that poverty is a violation of human rights driven by inequality, and it is a political choice. It is caused primarily by structural inequality in the distribution and redistribution of income and wealth. Therefore, it requires a political response. COVID-19 pandemic is also exacerbating existing inequalities. It hits the poor and the most excluded the hardest, and also pushes new people and new groups into poverty. There's also a widening gap between rich and poor in terms of regions and countries as well. We see also that governments are prioritizing business instead of protecting people in this crisis as well. There is increased income support available occasionally, but it is temporary, inadequate, and it fails to guarantee income for all. We see an increasing number of poor workers that fall outside of the support measures. These precarious workers are some of the biggest victims of this crisis. We also see that the majority of essential workers are poorly paid, and women and minorities are disproportionately overrepresented in such essential jobs like retail, health, and social services. Minimum income and social protection also fails to protect people from poverty. Despite welcome temporary increases in levels or coverage, many are left without income. The pandemic has also exposed inequalities in terms of health and the lack of access to affordable health and care. We see it is highlighted by the reports that poverty is indeed a key social determinant in terms of access to health. Then there is a lack of affordable housing, and rising energy, food, and other essential costs are forcing people into unacceptable choices, such as people need to choose between food, heating their homes, or buying other essentials. The COVID-19 pandemic is also increasing inequality in education and lifelong learning systems through digital exclusion. I mentioned earlier the shortages of computers and the lack of internet access that leave poor and vulnerable children and young people behind, thereby contributing to the transmission of poverty within the family. The crisis is also exposing the need for all policy proposals to have a clear social impact assessment. It is missing in the Green Deal and it is missing in the digital transition proposals. We are hopeful but skeptical about the national recovery and resilience plans. Concerns arise, therefore, that recovery instruments will not only not benefit the poor, but they risk generating increased poverty, and that austerity will again be the main tool to recuperate these public deficits and debts. And finally, social NGOs and the community sector offer a lifeline to people facing poverty, but they themselves are overstretched and they are under threat. The demands have increased for their services, yet they find that their funding is delayed or cut, or the requirements are changing. They are also sometimes rejected as key partners in certain countries, which is often a sign of wider attacks on democracy. Finally, the Poverty Watch report leads to several recommendations on the EU level. You can find these in detail and expanded in the report, which if you register to the conference, you should have gotten by email, but it will be available on our website as well. So these recommendations range from short-term remedies to a long-term strategy parenting social rights, including an ambitious action plan for the European social pillar and poverty-proof recovery and resilience plans. A new EU anti-poverty strategy with clear and ambitious poverty targets, a recommitment to the right to a decent income, as well as to the right to quality, affordable services, a socially just Green Deal that doesn't leave anyone behind, as von der Leyen mentioned or promised, committed, and a strengthened role for participation of people experiencing poverty and NGOs in the decision-making process. So this was a short overview only of the findings of the Poverty Watch 2020 report. I encourage you to look at the report and read it further, and to look at the national networks and European organizations specific reports also available on our website. And in the following presentations, we will hear more specifics from national networks and one European organization on certain subjects I also raised and more specificities. And of course, we are curious to see what the Commission's reaction to the report is. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna, for your presentation and to bringing to our attention and consideration some of the issues that are long-lasting challenges for the fight against poverty and social exclusion in Europe, but also some changes that were spawned by the current pandemic situation and its impact on the people, the everyday lives of people experiencing poverty and social exclusion. As Anna has said, our next section will include 7 speakers that are representatives of our members, in this case 3 national networks from Portugal, Slovenia and Belgium, and 1 European organization. They will present the Poverty Watch reports throughout Europe in the context of COVID-19. And I will highlight that we will have 2 representatives for each national network. One is the representative is the member of the European Inclusion Strategies Group of EAPN and a person with direct experience of poverty and social exclusions. The speakers will speak Portuguese, French and Slovenian. So please remember to select the interpretation button for translation into English or French. And I start by giving the floor to the representatives from EAPN Portugal, Cidália Barriga and Paula Cruz. Please.
Obrigada, boa tarde a todos e a todas. Obrigada pelo convite. Cumprimento também especial a todos os organizadores e aos restantes participantes, e em particular à Cidália, que me acompanha em mais este desafio, que me acompanha nesta apresentação. Eu gostaria de começar por situar o Poverty Watch no tempo. O próximo slide, só para vermos o índice. Obrigada. O Poverty Watch foi elaborado no primeiro semestre de 2020 e eu penso que isto é importante dizê-lo, é importante dizer este tipo de coisas, situá-lo realmente no tempo. E para além deste retrato, do retrato do país relativamente à pobreza e à exclusão social, que eu vou apresentar de uma forma sumária já de seguida, ele apresenta também, ele centrou-se claramente nos impactos da pandemia e apresenta os principais resultados de 2 exercícios que fizemos nesse período. Um deles foi um questionário elaborado em parceria com o Ministério do Trabalho, da Solidariedade e da Segurança Social, um questionário que lançamos às ONGs para perceber o impacto da Covid nas organizações e na intervenção social, nomeadamente nos grupos com os públicos com os quais estas organizações trabalham, e um segundo exercício de auscultação aos cidadãos, e aqui falo em particular de todos os membros dos nossos conselhos locais. E esses resultados será a Cidália a apresentar mais à frente com mais detalhe. O próximo slide. O Poverty Watch, tal como a Cindy já disse e como a Ana já disse, tem esta particularidade extremamente importante para nós, tem a voz dos próprios cidadãos, e a EAPN tem criadas desde 2009 estruturas locais que nós designamos por conselhos locais de cidadãos, que são grupos de trabalho, compostos por pessoas que vivem ou já viveram em situação de pobreza e exclusão social. Nós temos 18 conselhos locais, um em cada distrito do país, e depois um representante de cada um destes grupos forma aquilo que nós chamamos o Conselho Nacional de Cidadãos. O que nós fizemos logo em abril de 2020 foi um contacto telefónico, que era o que era possível fazer também naquele momento, um contacto telefónico com todos os membros dos conselhos locais, portanto estamos a falar de mais de 90 pessoas que fazem parte dos grupos, e procurou-se perceber desde logo quais eram os principais impactos, as mudanças que a pandemia estava a trazer às suas vidas. Ambos os exercícios, portanto, quer aquilo que fizemos com as ONGs, quer com as pessoas, deram origem a relatórios específicos, mas os resultados também foram integrados neste Poverty Watch. Olhando então àquilo que é o retrato da situação de pobreza e exclusão social no país. O próximo slide. Obrigada. Temos que olhar para os dados que são de 2018 e 2019, que mostram-nos uma taxa de risco de pobreza e exclusão social para Portugal com valores ainda muito próximos ao do ano anterior. Houve apenas uma ligeira descida nos dados da privação material e da intensidade laboral, mas se nós pudéssemos multiplicar aqui os slides, nós teríamos vários triângulos destes, porque teríamos que olhar a várias dimensões. E uma delas era logo, por exemplo, se olharmos para a dimensão do género, as mulheres continuam a estar mais vulneráveis à pobreza comparativamente aos homens. Se olharmos também para a idade, as crianças continuam a ser um dos grupos mais vulneráveis à pobreza. Se olharmos também para o agregado, o próximo slide, obrigada, verificamos também que são as famílias com crianças, nomeadamente as famílias monoparentais, mas também aquelas famílias mais alargadas que estão numa maior situação de vulnerabilidade. Se olharmos para a dimensão também do mercado de trabalho, sobretudo se olharmos para o tipo de ligação que existe ao mercado de trabalho, vemos claramente um maior risco de pobreza junto dos trabalhadores com vínculos precários e também com os trabalhadores por conta própria. É importante dizer que Portugal voltou a aumentar a taxa de trabalhadores pobres e também aqui é importante dizer que são as mulheres onde se verifica esse maior aumento de trabalhadores pobres e onde também o peso do salário mínimo é mais significativo. Não estar no mercado de trabalho, ou seja, estar numa situação de desemprego, representa também um grande risco, uma grande vulnerabilidade à pobreza e nós tínhamos cerca de 47,5% de pessoas em risco de pobreza, que estavam no desemprego e que estavam em risco de pobreza. O desemprego também registado aumentou consideravelmente 35% em outubro de 2020, comparativamente ao período homólogo de 2019. Fazendo uma pequena referência também às prestações. As prestações sociais, nomeadamente as pensões, têm um peso considerável na redução da pobreza, da taxa de risco de pobreza, mas sabemos, por exemplo, olhando ao subsídio-desemprego, em 2019, apenas 30,6% da população desempregada é que recebia subsídio-desemprego, portanto, teríamos todo um outro conjunto de pessoas que não oferiam este tipo de prestação e que estariam também numa situação mais vulnerável. Se olharmos para a prestação que está mais orientada para as pessoas que vivem numa situação de carência e de pobreza extrema, como é o rendimento social de inserção, é importante dizer que esta é uma prestação relevante para reduzir a severidade da pobreza, mas ainda tem um impacto muito limitado em retirar as pessoas da pobreza. Se olharmos para os dados do RSI, nós vemos também aqui o impacto da pandemia. Nós percebemos e vemos claramente um aumento considerável do número de beneficiários a partir de março de 2020. Há um dado dentro do Poverty Watch, que depois vocês com certeza poderão ver com mais detalhe, que tem a ver com o apoio alimentar. A rede de emergência alimentar, que foi criada logo no início da pandemia em Portugal, em apenas 2 semanas, recebeu mais de 3.000 pedidos de apoio alimentar. Por que é que eu digo isto também em particular? Porque quando apresentamos o questionário, quando lançamos o questionário às ONGs, também percebemos pelas respostas das organizações, e eu peço imensa desculpa, o meu cão começou a ladrar. Peço imensa desculpa. Nós percebemos, por aquilo que elas nos disseram, que realmente estariam a receber muito mais pedidos de ajuda em termos de alimentar e teriam também muitas dificuldades em atender aos vários pedidos que estavam a receber. O próximo slide. O próximo. Obrigada. Portanto, o retrato do país em matéria de pobreza é plural, é multidimensional. Temos várias faces da pobreza, como puderam ver também pelos dados que eu apresentei: crianças, mulheres, famílias monoparentais, famílias alargadas, imigrantes, minorias étnicas, desempregados, trabalhadores em situação precária. Quando perguntamos às ONGs que grupos se destacaram como sendo os mais afetados pela pandemia, eles referiram logo os trabalhadores com vínculos precários, as pessoas idosas que vivem isoladas, os desempregados, as famílias numerosas em situação de pobreza ou sobrelotação e as famílias monoparentais em situação de pobreza ou sem qualquer tipo de rede de apoio. E também aqui nos disseram que não é indiferente ser mulher ou homem, as mulheres foram claramente muito mais afetadas pela pandemia. Eu termino aqui a minha apresentação, passo a palavra à Cidália, que nos vai falar das preocupações dos membros dos conselhos locais e do impacto do Covid nas suas vidas. Obrigada e mais uma vez desculpa pela intermissão do cão.
Convém pôr o som, não é verdade? Boa tarde a todos, obrigado pelo convite. A Paula já fez os devidos agradecimentos, portanto não vou alongar-me mais nisso. O impacto, eu vou-vos falar sobre o impacto da pandemia nas pessoas em situação de pobreza, que já de si era um estado mau, neste momento é avassalador. Estamos a falar de pessoas que já estavam vulneráveis do ponto de vista económico e social e viram a sua situação degradar-se ainda mais. A desigualdade agravou-se, e não só a nível económico, mas também no acesso aos serviços essenciais, à saúde, à habitação, à educação e à integração no mercado de trabalho. Isto trouxe impactos diferentes nos variados grupos de pessoas. Daquilo que foi ouvido na auscultação que se fez aos elementos dos conselhos locais, percebemos que a pandemia trouxe e ainda traz sérias consequências nas áreas do emprego, do rendimento, da habitação, do isolamento, da saúde e da educação. No emprego, muitas pessoas viram isto o resultado das nossas pesquisas e das nossas entrevistas. Muitas pessoas viram suspensos os seus contratos de trabalho, na sua totalidade, ou em regime de layoff, provocou logo desde o início a diminuição de rendimentos e o agravamento de situações que já eram precárias antes desta situação. Havia muitos cidadãos que trabalhavam em regimes precários, em part-time ou na economia informal e deixaram de ter essas oportunidades no mercado de trabalho. É importante também dizer que a este nível existem pessoas que tinham, por exemplo, como rendimento principal o rendimento mínimo. E sendo o rendimento mínimo um valor tão baixo e tão insuficiente para as necessidades, ele normalmente era colmatado com alguns trabalhos de pescate, de algumas vendas, e que no momento da pandemia as pessoas deixaram de poder exercer estas atividades e ficaram numa situação ainda muito mais frágil do que aquela que tinham. A quebra deste rendimento na capacidade de fazer face às despesas do dia-a-dia, como o pagamento da renda, crédito à habitação, na aquisição de medicamentos, agravou-se, e em particular na situação de determinados grupos, como os mais idosos, as famílias monoparentais e a situação das mulheres, como a Paula já tinha dito, verificou-se ainda que ficou ainda pior que aquilo que era. Verificando-se esta perda de trabalhos informais que ajudavam no orçamento e compunham algumas situações mais graves, como situações de desemprego e, sobretudo, incerteza perante o futuro em termos de trabalho, notamos que há uma crescente sensação de insegurança, uma vez que não se pode recorrer ao subsídio de desemprego e, como não se encontram em layoff ou em suspensão, a possibilidade de trabalho depende exclusivamente do mercado informal, que poderá evoluir consoante o restante do mercado económico, nomeadamente na restauração, limpezas e trabalho doméstico. Na habitação houve também vários problemas que se agravaram com a pandemia. A falta de uma habitação adequada, que já de si é um problema constante. As más condições habitacionais têm impactos consideráveis, por exemplo, nas crianças. Como é que podemos exigir que as crianças aprendam ou continuem os seus estudos se não têm material para isso e, em muitos casos, não têm luz, não têm aquecimento e não têm uma sala própria, uma sala que elas possam usar para estudar com calma e um adulto que as acompanhe? Pessoas que, perante uma situação de desemprego e de layoff, não conseguem pagar a renda das habitações e por isso tiveram que sair para habitações mais ruins, mais frágeis. Como não têm contratos de arrendamento, vivem por vezes mais que uma família por habitação e não podem recorrer às moratórias dos pagamentos propostos pelo programa criado pelo governo. Neste momento, estamos a fazer nova auscultação. Houve famílias que conseguiram recorrer a estas moratórias, famílias que tinham tudo legal, e neste momento eram para começar a restabelecer os pagamentos e não o conseguem fazer, porque estamos novamente em confinamento e acho que estamos muito pior do que estávamos em março do ano passado. O isolamento também tem provocado vários problemas, as famílias, as relações familiares, o contacto com os amigos, os vizinhos, os conhecidos, os colegas de trabalho. O acesso aos meios digitais ajudam a combater este isolamento, mas para isso é preciso a capacidade que cada um de nós tem. E isso, para resistir de uma forma saudável e interativa, é preciso recorrermos às nossas capacidades. E isto vai variando conforme os recursos que nós possuímos, sejam eles económicos, sociais, culturais, ou mesmo da nossa dependência face aos outros. Há outros fatores que trouxeram consequências que muito ultrapassam o distanciamento social e a falta do elemento de socialização. Por exemplo, o problema da falta de espaço. Provoca muitas vezes tensões. Se o espaço é exíguo e é partilhado com os restantes elementos da família, cria muitas tensões. A sensação de falta de liberdade, a limitação aos movimentos, as deslocações habituais e à rotina. E ainda temos o problema de quando temos alguém em teletrabalho. Eu posso falar por mim, eu tenho várias pessoas em teletrabalho em casa, e nós temos que nos adequar uns aos outros, temos que ceder uns com os outros, temos que determinar as nossas rotinas e o que temos para fazer de maneira a não prejudicar os outros, e isso às vezes é um bocadinho difícil de gerir e cria muitas tensões. Na saúde, tem-se verificado dificuldades no acesso a consultas médicas, alguma privação de medicação, por vezes dificuldades de comunicação com o médico de família, e nas pessoas com o estado mental, que já era ruim, agravou-se com o confinamento social. O quadro psicológico neste momento em Portugal não é muito bom. Quem não tinha está a sofrer de stress. O stress está a atacar todos os portugueses. O distanciamento social provoca angústia e mal-estar e faz-nos falta o contacto social, o contacto com os amigos, com a família. Estes aumentos de níveis de stress, ansiedade, mal-estar físico causam-nos uma sensação de desespero. Na educação, houve medidas tomadas no setor da educação. Eu acho que houve muito boa vontade da parte do governo, mas está a provocar ainda mais desigualdade entre os alunos e as famílias. Está a acentuar-se mais a diferença entre os que podem e têm os meios necessários para o ensino à distância, computador e internet, e os que não têm. E mesmo que tenham, como é que se pode pedir a uma criança de 6 anos que aprenda a ler e a escrever olhando para um monitor? Esta situação é particularmente penosa e, além de acentuar e agravar as desigualdades educacionais, leva-nos a chegar à conclusão que o ensino à distância não está a funcionar. Dito isto, trago algumas recomendações. É importante o reforço da solidariedade e cada vez mais a participação das pessoas na procura de soluções para dar resposta aos desafios que se apresentam. A participação das pessoas mais desfavorecidas na busca das respostas adequadas, com respeito pela sua dignidade, interesses e aspirações, favorece o aumento da sua autoestima e o reforço da sua capacidade de construir um projeto de vida próprio. O reforço da proteção social é central e aqui a EAPN Portugal tem defendido que uma forma de se proteger as pessoas em risco de pobreza é pela garantia de um rendimento adequado e acessível para todos. A importância de se definir um sistema comum de rendimento mínimo que permita combater a pobreza e a exclusão social numa perspectiva ambiciosa e integrada. Uma estratégia nacional de luta contra a pobreza, e mesmo europeia. Neste momento já existe uma Comissão Nacional responsável pela elaboração desta estratégia. O que apontávamos em junho no Poverty Watch começou a ser concretizado a partir deste outubro passado e a nossa expectativa é grande. Precisamos de uma estratégia integrada baseada em direitos que garanta o acesso a serviços públicos de qualidade, incluindo serviços sociais e proteção social, apoio a empregos e participação de qualidade. A estratégia deve ser monitorizada de forma transparente e proativa e é importante que crie espaços à participação dos cidadãos, nomeadamente os mais vulneráveis, porque só incluindo as vozes e as experiências das pessoas se poderá definir um caminho na luta contra a pobreza com verdadeiro impacto. Temos consciência de que os efeitos desta situação estão ainda no início e que temos de estar particularmente atentos ao efeito desta situação nos direitos sociais das pessoas estes precisam de ser protegidos e salvaguardados. Obrigada e desculpem pelo tempo.
Thank you, Cidalia and Paula, for your presentation and more direct perspective of the situation in Portugal regarding poverty and social exclusion and the impacts of the current pandemic. I would like to remind the participants that they can place their questions in the chat so we can answer them and pick them up in the open session. And I now give the floor to the representatives of EAPN Slovenia, Daniela Marcola and Ziva Amar. Please.
Ja, kar dejte, gospa, kar dejte, jaz bom pa dala PowerPoint.
Lep pozdrav vsem. Hvala za povabilo. Moja izkušnja bo predvsem osebna. Kot mama samohranilka 4 otrok. Znašla sem se v revščini. Začetki moje revščine segajo v leto 2018. Aha, okej. Aha. A Maruša, me izklopite sami iz angleščine. Aha. Jaz pa njega poslušam, ko me prevaja gospod. Evo. Izkušnja z revščino sega v leto 2018, ko sem ostala sama s 4 otroki. Nekako sem si zaželela boljšega življenja, zato sem se ločila. In v varstvo in skrbništvo sta mi pripadla 2 mladoletna otroka. 2, ki sta bila že polnoletna, pa sta prav tako ostala z mano. Avgusta 2018 sem oddala vlogo za štipendijo za 3. otroka in dobila v novembru pozitivno odločbo. Istočasno pa odločbo, da moram vrniti socialno pomoč za mesec september in oktober. To je vse skupaj v bistvu postavilo na glavo in iskala sem rešitev. Vedela sem, da se pri meni niso stvari spremenile in da je sigurno prišlo do spremembe v zakonu. In sem poiskala vzrok. Sicer se je šlo tukaj za dvig cen nepremičninam. Mi smo prestopili to mejo 120.000 evrov in zato ostali brez socialne pomoči. Zato, da je država dobila vrnjeno socialno pomoč za 2 meseca, september in oktober, so mi vzeli otroške doklade. Preživnino, katero sva sklenila na sodišču z bivšim partnerjem, nisem prejemala, ker je ni plačeval. Ostali so mi krediti, mesečni stroški in 4 otroci. Nihče v državi me pravzaprav ni slišal, niti center za socialno delo. Celo pisala sem varuhu človekovih pravic in je si opral roke nad mojo situacijo in predal vse skupaj v roke centru za socialno delo. Ministrstvo mi je v letu 2019 poslalo negativno odločbo, ampak moje psihično stanje v bistvu je bilo takrat že v eni veliki težavi in pravzaprav mi je bilo takrat že vseeno, jaz sem vedela, da se moram reševati. Edini, ki so mi priskočili na pomoč, je bila Zveza prijateljev mladine. Oni so pregledali mojo dokumentacijo in dejansko videli, da se gre za napako. Zame se je začelo eno težko obdobje boja, boja za preživetje, kako omogočiti otrokom najosnovnejše. Tri otroci so se redno šolali in bila sem dolžna zagotoviti vse, kar je pač najnujnejše. Gledala sem, da mi ne izklopijo elektrike, to mi je bilo najbolj poglavitno, in da zagotavljam vsaj 2 obroka na dan otrokom. Otroci so imeli organizirano prehrano tudi v šoli, kar mi je olajšalo, da so imeli vsaj en topel obrok. Prikrajšanost, krivice, lahko rečem tudi psihično nasilje nad otrokom v šoli, ker smo bili revni, to se ne da opisati z besedo. To so trenutki groze. Ko pride otrok in reče, mami, nimamo hrane. Ko ne veš, kaj boš dal na mizo, ko najdeš v hladilniku slučajno, kot češ slučajno, eno jajce in narediš večerjo. Ni lahko in težko se je skopati iz revščine. Jaz sem se potem zaposlila in v letu 2020 zaradi COVID-a zopet ostala brez zaposlitve. Strah, nesigurnost, kako bom naprej, kaj mi bo tokrat namenila država, na koga se lahko še obrnem, kam lahko grem še delati, v bistvu postaneš suženj v lastni državi. Ljudje, ki so mogočnejši, znajo to dobro izkoristiti in velikokrat sem delala za minimalno plačilo, da sem mogoče zaslužila 10 evrov na dan, da sem lahko omogočila najnujnejše stvari. Ni enostavno se spopadati z revščino in situacija, ki je nastala zaradi COVID-a, nas je ohromila pravzaprav še bolj, ni zaposlitev, ne moreš si sam pomagati, ne moreš osmisliti svojega življenja. Kot mama si želim, da bi dobila priložnost in da bi lahko zaživela bolj kvalitetno. Sama brez organizacije ZPM tega sigurno ne bi zmogla. Tako da to je moj prispevek, hvala za pozornost.
Thank you, Ms. Daniela Marzola, for your very valuable contribution. My name is Živa Humer, and I will continue the presentation from our side, so from EAPN Slovenia. Let me first share with you a few information about EAPN Slovenia. EAPN Slovenia is an informal network which was established in 2019 when it also became a member of European Anti-Poverty Network. EAPN Slovenia is currently composed by 19 organizations and is coordinated by the national NGO umbrella network. Poverty Watch Report Slovenia is the first of its kind prepared within our network. The majority of Slovenian members, the majority of members of the Slovenian network participated with their inputs for the report, but the central part consists of testimonies, reflections, and stories of persons experiencing poverty who participated in the discussion group organized at the beginning of September 2020 as part of the preparation of this report. The biggest value added of this discussion group is the insight into how the poverty is made in Slovenia. And at the same time, the conduct of the discussion group was one of our first important steps within the Slovenian network towards the direction of empowerment, inclusion and recognition of persons experiencing poverty as key stakeholders in the joint design of policies and measures for the elimination of poverty and social exclusion. If I now move to the context, let me say that according to the Statistical Office of the Republic of Slovenia, every 8th inhabitant lives below the risk poverty threshold. And what is also important here is to say that the minimum income in Slovenia is 402.18 euros, and at the risk of poverty threshold is 703 euros. According to the Statistical Office, the most vulnerable groups are women, especially those over 65 years of age, single-member household, single-parent families with school-age children, the unemployed, and workers with low income, and precarious workers. But what we also pointed out in the report is that among vulnerable groups are, of course, people with disabilities, migrants, Roma population. So let me, I just got a note that I still have, that I have 4 minutes, so I will speed up a bit. So due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, many of our members of the network who are working with people experiencing poverty pointed out that poverty and social exclusion increased. Especially they reported the material deprivation, the unemployment have risen, and the situation of people working in precarious jobs worsened. Also, there is an increase in support needed among pre-existing beneficiaries, particularly elderly people, people with health problems, people with disabilities, families with homeschooled children, and among new beneficiaries are people who lost their jobs, precarious workers, people with low income, and our members also reported that among new beneficiaries are those who received aid in the last economic and social crisis, which means 10 years ago. We also pointed out in the report the problem of multi-generational poverty. The poverty of elderly people, which is one of the key problems that is also related to the access of long-term care services. In Slovenia, almost every third woman over 75 years lives below the poverty threshold. And the population in Slovenia is aging rapidly, and equal access to care is questionable because increasingly it is increasingly dependent on the financial situation of users and their relatives. A large share of care, mainly in economically weaker families, is carried out by women as unpaid work, which puts them in unequal position in the labor market. Further, a gender pay gap, gender pension gap, they both significantly contribute to the criminalization of poverty. So basically, if I run through the main challenges and key recommendations, the problem of long-term poverty and distress of people with minimum income and their resulting social exclusion. Social welfare legislation stipulates that cash benefits should cover the minimum life necessities in the amount which ensures subsistence. Therefore, it is very problematic that the minimum income does not ensure neither subsistence of the beneficiaries nor their active inclusion in the society and in the labor market. Of all the beneficiaries, almost 60% received cash benefits over a longer time, meaning at least 2 years in the past 3 years. This points to the long-term dependence on social benefits and limited opportunities to exit poverty and enter the labor market. So our recommendations went in the direction that the state should adopt measures to reduce negative effects of the corona crisis on poverty and unemployment. Also, we pointed out that the crisis had more negative effect on women, which is why special attention needs to be paid to the reduction of newly emerged gender inequalities. Violence is also a growing problem during lockdowns, so we pointed out the importance to ensure safe routes to assistance and, above all, sufficient capacities in safe houses. We also pointed out that centers for social work need to be accessible, and at the same time, assistance procedures need to be simplified. Decisions must be issued immediately for families to resolve their specific situations without unnecessary repeated calls for amendments of applications, which unreasonably prolong the time to receive the needed assistance. The emergency financial social assistance must be accessible quicker, in case of urgent situation, and in cases of loss of employment or a significant reduction in income, the Center for Social Work must provide immediate assistance and the exercise of rights from public funds. Also, provisions should be made for the possibility of deferring the payment of loans, leases, or debts for the duration of the extreme circumstances and without disproportionately high costs. In the report, you also emphasize that it is necessary to provide support to all those who have dropped out the social system, and above all, to expand the circle of beneficiaries entitled unemployment benefits during the corona crisis, and to provide support to precarious workers, workers in culture and arts, and students, young people who have been left out without the student work, which is the main source for living. Last but not the least, let me conclude that the solidarity is an important value which was once again confirmed during last year. Informal and unpaid mutual aid activities on non-governmental organizations and organized voluntary work, they all form a safety network that complements the social care system provided by the state. These kind of activities should be both recognized and appropriately supported by the state, including financially. At the same time, it is important, and I'm concluding now, to know that it is the role of the state to ensure holistic social security for inhabitants and not to just simply shift the burden onto the non-governmental, voluntary, or poorly paid activities. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ziva, Daniela, for your presentation and to bringing us some information about the reality in Slovenia. Also highlighting the role that governments and social protection systems can play in addressing the challenges that, for example, these current pandemic situations have brought us, but also challenges that were there already since before. I ask now the representatives of EAPN Belgium, Noélie de Nomerang and Caroline van der Oven, to do their presentation, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Helder, and thanks a lot to EAPN and also to the intergroup of the Parliament on Poverty to give us the opportunity to present the Poverty Watch of Belgium. I would like to start the presentation with a small introduction on the Belgium Anti-Poverty Network. As the main objective of our network is to represent the voice of people experiencing poverty at the federal level in Belgium and also at the European level through our membership of EAPN. For this, we work very closely with our regional members, the regional networks against poverty, who are in direct contact with people experiencing poverty, and also with local organizations. And so our poverty report is really based on the experiences and visions and points of view of people experiencing poverty, and is based on the work which we do on a daily basis. I would like to start by giving the floor to Noélie de Nomerang, who is facilitator in prevention of inequalities at the Walloon Anti-Poverty Network. Noélie is an expert by experience herself, and for her work at the Walloon Network, amongst others, she has done interviews with people experiencing loss of income and loss of work because of the crisis. And she also answers to calls to the 1718 line of the Walloon government, which is an emergency line where people can call for social emergency situation, and there is a partnership with the Walloon network. So she has a broad experience of what people are facing on the ground because of the crisis. So Noélie, la parole est à toi.
Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. Bonjour à vous tous et toutes. Bon, je m'appelle Noélie, je suis facilitatrice en prévention des inégalités au réseau wallon de lutte contre la pauvreté. Au mois de mai 2020, j'ai eu l'occasion d'interviewer des personnes ayant eu des pertes de revenus dues à la situation de confinement. Du jour au lendemain, beaucoup de ces personnes se sont retrouvées sans emploi, au chômage temporaire ou avec une perte de revenus souvent catastrophique. Même la plus petite perte de salaire peut mettre des personnes en grande difficulté. On entend parler de primes pour aider les indépendants, mais tout le monde n'y aura pas le droit, car il faut des conditions, des rentrées financières importantes durant l'année 2019, pour tenter une demande qui finalement risque de ne pas être acceptée et plonger l'indépendant dans un désarroi total. Les personnes qui ont des contrats précaires seront touchées encore plus durement, sans aucune certitude de retrouver leur boulot par la suite. Quant aux personnes avec des CDI, certains ont dû faire face à une perte de revenus assez conséquente qui va les plonger et aussi devoir choisir et jongler entre des prêts à rembourser et le choix de factures à payer. Les artistes payent aussi le prix fort, car ils n'ont pas tous le statut d'artiste, et avec eux, tous les milieux culturels et les professions liées au monde du spectacle subissent de dures conséquences. Les étudiants ont également perdu leur job, celui qui leur permettait de payer leurs livres, leurs chambres et de subvenir à leurs besoins alimentaires. Les familles monoparentales ont été de plus en plus prises au piège dans cette spirale infernale. Les travailleurs et travailleuses du sexe ont été oubliés et ne bénéficiaient plus d'aucun moyen pour vivre au quotidien. Les personnes sans papier, les personnes SDF, sont devenues de plus en plus invisibles dans la société. Il y a encore tant d'exemples que je pourrais vous donner. Avec toutes ces interviews, j'ai pu constater que la santé était souvent mise de côté. L'achat des médicaments, les examens médicaux, les visites chez le médecin ont été reportés avec des conséquences dramatiques par rapport à des maladies chroniques, cancers, etc. Même si beaucoup prévoyaient un budget plus important pour l'alimentation, les personnes n'ont pas eu d'autre choix que de se tourner vers une alimentation moins équilibrée et moins variée. Les enfants et les adolescents ont subi des carences alimentaires parfois très graves. Les demandes de colis alimentaires ont explosé. Le choix des factures à payer ou pas a engendré des peurs, des angoisses et énormément d'incertitudes. Certains ont dû demander de l'aide au CPS, avec un grand sentiment d'incapacité de se gérer qui aboutit à de la honte. Obtenir des papiers n'était pas facile, avec les portes des administrations fermées, le personnel en télétravail, le patron qui n'avait pas toujours complété le contrat, les personnes dont la langue maternelle n'est pas le français, la complexité des papiers à remplir, le salarié qui ne sait pas toujours quel mot utiliser pour bénéficier de ses droits, etc. Tout cela réuni a mis ces personnes dans une précarité encore plus importante. On a pu constater que tout le monde ne possédait pas l'outil informatique, ni de connexion Internet, ni d'imprimante. Les étudiants ont été les premiers touchés par cette problématique. Soudainement, les cours devaient être suivis à domicile. Les familles ont été confrontées à ce problème de taille. Comment une famille ayant plusieurs enfants peut-elle fournir un outil à chaque enfant? Avec cette situation, des familles ont dû s'endetter. À cela s'ajoute parfois un décrochage scolaire important et pour beaucoup, un mal-être et une perte de confiance en soi. Être enfermé dans des logements non conformes, trop petits, sans confort, a également provoqué une augmentation de violence intrafamiliale, que ce soit envers les enfants ou entre adultes, majoritairement des femmes. Le mal-être, les angoisses, les incertitudes, les violences, l'hypersensibilité, les pertes de repères, de liberté, de travail, le manque de contact avec la famille et les amis ont engendré des problèmes d'ordre psychologique. Beaucoup de personnes doivent être aidées et soutenues de façon de plus en plus régulière. Usées par les difficultés qui les font plonger de plus en plus bas, certaines personnes n'ouvrent plus leurs portes, ni leur foyer, et se retrouvent confrontées à la suite de cela à vivre parfois sans aucun revenu, qui peut malheureusement aboutir à des expulsions, à un endettement, à une rupture totale avec l'entourage et la société. Il y a encore tant à dire, à faire entendre. Toutes ces histoires sont douloureuses et des personnes qui ont bien besoin d'aide à tout niveau. Je voudrais finir ce texte en abordant un sujet en particulier, car j'ai connu ces situations personnellement. Des amis ont choisi de quitter cette vie. Ce n'étaient pas des personnes qui avaient des problèmes personnels, oh non. C'étaient des personnes passionnées par leur métier, avec une empathie sincère envers les autres et qui avaient des rêves d'une vie meilleure. Ils étaient indépendants, ils étaient artistes, ils étaient essentiels pour leur famille, leurs amis, leurs clients, mais ils ont choisi de partir dans les étoiles car ils se perdaient de plus en plus dans les dédales de ce que nous vivons actuellement. Merci. Voilà, Caroline.
Thanks a lot, Noélie. We would like to continue with presenting some of the findings of our poverty reports. I'm not going to present the entire report because it also touches upon other subjects such as homelessness and child poverty, work, and so on. But we wanted to give a few highlights on topics which are very important in the frame of the Belgium context on poverty. So first, I would like to start by presenting the evolution of poverty over the last decade within Belgium, the impact of the COVID crisis, which Noélie already talked about as well, social protection, and then we also made a policies analysis, and we also have some questions for the Commission and for the intergroup. With regard to the evolution of poverty during the last decades, you can see the orange bar, which is the actual evolution of poverty during the last 15 years. And then you see the bar in blue, which is actually what we committed to within the frame of the Europe 2020 strategy to lift 380,000 people out of poverty. So it's clear that within Belgium, we didn't reach that objective in 2020. And actually, we didn't make any progress towards that objective. So taking from the beginning, the reference year 2008, then to 2018, which is the end of the Europe 2020 strategy timeline, we see actually that we're on the same level in terms of poverty. And to give an idea of how many people are in poverty within Belgium, according to the latest figures of AROP, so people in monetary poverty, it regards almost 1.7 million people, or 14.8% of the Belgian population, which we find an extreme high number for a rich country such as Belgium. We see that because of the COVID crisis, people with a low income have been hit the hardest by the crisis, and that the crisis have reinforced already existing inequalities and existing poverty within society. Particularly people with a very low budget, a very low household budget have experienced a lot of pressure because of loss of income. And Noélie already has talked about these people within precarious work conditions, with precarious contracts in a typical work, such as students who work, interim workers, people with a defined contract, people working in the platform economy. All of those, they're not really covered or not sufficiently covered by the social protection system, and they have suffered a lot of loss of income. And before, in the introduction, Cindy Franssen already talked about the importance of work. And actually what we see within Belgium is that work protects people against poverty. But if you don't have a decent wage, or if you don't have a decent contract or decent working conditions, you actually fall out of the system, which is happening to the most precarious people within our society. So work, yes, it protects against poverty, but we should particularly look at those people who are at the margin of the system, that they are also protected when things get rough, as was the effect of the crisis. We also see that there was a pressure on household budget because of increase of prices, for instance, for food, and also because people stayed at home more. So there was more consumption of electricity, of water, also because to work at home or to follow school, people had to buy PC equipment, which is of course very expensive if you live in poverty. And also important is that many people don't have a lot of saving. Many people in poverty, it's a big problem within Belgium. 1 in 4 within our society, and this was before the crisis, doesn't have any savings. So with the first wave of the coronavirus, people were already struggling a lot. And now with the second wave, there are a lot of severe consequences at the lack of saving. Now, if people had a bit of saving, now it's completely gone. They can't pay their bills. So there increasingly is a problem of debts, and it's bills for very basic issues to survive. It's for electricity, it's for water, it's for housing, and this becomes a big problem. Also, people are not going to the doctor because they can't pay it, so they try to go later. But of course, we know that this will have a lot of consequences on the long term, that people will get more sick because they didn't go on time to the doctor or to the dentist or to the hospital. So this will be a big cost also in the long term and create even more medical issues for people experiencing poverty. And the crisis has already shown that people experiencing poverty face a lot of medical risks already. Because of the coronavirus, people experiencing poverty got more sick, and there was also a higher mortality rate. And this has been documented by several studies. Then increasingly, there are also a lot of mental health issues, as already explained by Noélie in a very clear way as well, which is going very far. People even committing suicide. There are several cases of that. And within Belgium, there is a lot of discussion on sending people to the psychologist. But for people experiencing poverty, they actually need a solution for their income problem, for the fact that they can't pay their rent, for the fact that they can't pay their bills, for the fact that they risk to be evicted, for the fact that they can't go to the doctor. This is causing them stress, and we need a solution for this. And talking to a psychologist doesn't really seem to be the solution for a lot of the mental health issues that people experiencing poverty are facing, although of course it can always help. And there are also, as Noélie already said as well, a lot of effects on children and young people. For instance, with regard to education, 81% of young people in a vulnerable situation have problems with school assignments. 66% don't have a laptop at home, so they struggle to carry out their assignments and also to follow lessons and so on. 76% don't have enough space at home to follow school, and 61% don't have anyone to help them with their school assignments. So for children and young people following education, they're really struggling at the moment. And for students in poverty, for them to be able to finance their studies, having a job is very important. And so they're also struggling with that because they can't work at the moment, so they can't pay their studies neither. And also very important, a very important consequence is the lack of perspective. And now finally there is a rollout of the vaccination strategy, but still we don't know how long the coronavirus will be in our society, when all the measures will stop, when we can see each other again, when you can work again, and so on. So this lack of the perspective is weighing very hard on people experiencing poverty. With regard to social protection and income, we wanted to highlight that, and this was already before the crisis, but there is an indicator in the social scoreboard of the European Commission on impact of social transfers on poverty reduction. And for us, we're very worried about the fact that the effectiveness of social transfers on poverty reduction is declining, and it's declining very rapidly. For instance, in 2018, the effectiveness of the social transfers on poverty was still around was declined to 34.7%, whereas 2 years earlier in 2016, it was 44.2%. So we have a decline of effectiveness of 10% in 2 years, which is extremely worrying for us, and which is also something which has been picked up by the European Commission, as before this indicator was green, but now it's orange and something to be watched. Another issue with regard to income is that minimum income schemes still remain far below the European poverty threshold. The new government finally decided to install a plan to increase minimum income schemes. So this is a step forward, as governments are already promising 10 years to do something about the very low minimum income schemes. But yeah, we haven't seen anything yet until this moment. So now there are plans, but the plans, they're too little and too late, because when we look at the increasement, we see that still a lot of income schemes will remain far. So it still will be a big difference with the poverty threshold. For instance, for people with minimum income scheme, for people who with unemployment benefits, for people with a disability. So a lot of people, they will go forward a bit, but not nearly enough. So this is very worrying for us. Then in relation to access to minimum income schemes, we still see that there are a lot of problems, that some groups are even excluded. And the reason for this is that there is still this general mentality of controlling people or putting conditions so that people show that they are worthy or that they actually have a right to access certain rights. And also this issue of blaming that you're responsible for your own situation. All of these, it leads that people have problems to access their much needed income support, and that some people don't even can access them at all. Then there is the issue as well of the statute of cohabitants, which means that if you live together, you lose a big portion of your minimum income scheme. And this is causing a lot of problems for a lot of people living together because of loss of income, but also because the controls for the statute are very invasive and are not respecting the rights and liberties of people with an income living together. With regard to the policy analysis of the measures, and specifically the measures related to income taken by the federal government, we can highlight that there has been a budget to combat the crisis, budget of 75 million euro. The decision for this was discussed within a federal task force, where also EAPN and other actors of civil society were included. So we appreciated this direct dialogue with the government and with the organizations on the ground. Yet we can only conclude that a budget of 75 million, it's a lot of money, but to combat a social crisis, it's not nearly enough. And one of the measures which we have advocated for a lot is to give an allowance of financial support to those people with a very low income. And this has been put in place for a few groups, but the amount is very low and it's not given to everyone. So a lot of groups are excluded, and we really fear, because of the support is not enough. All of these problems are now growing and continuing, that there is a big group within society which is forgotten, people with low incomes who were living from benefits and who are now struggling even more than before. and also people within precarious contracts in atypical jobs who are not covered sufficiently by social protection system. And also someone has written it also in the chat, the problems with people who are independent and who are struggling as well at the moment very much. So as said before, the government has planned to increase minimum income schemes, but it's only happening in phases. So for the entire race, people have to wait until the end of the legislation in 2024, which is coming too late. The problems are now, we need to act now. So this is not really a solution for the many people who are struggling at the moment. Also, there has been a lot of news about the resilience and recovery plans. Also the plan for Belgium, because it regards a big, larger budget of the European Commission. And we were actually quite disappointed about the process so far. Because it has been announced that one of the three priorities for Belgium is social inclusion, but there has been no consultation so far with anti-poverty organizations or with civil society working in the social sector. Process has not been transparent. We don't know what the plans are with regard to social inclusion. We heard that there will be some things done on the digital divide, but we don't know. And we really have the feeling that the vision to combat social exclusion seems to be missing, and that it's more of a political agreement. And we have a government, a federal government with many political parties. So everyone wants to have a budget for their plans, and then there also needs to be an agreement with the regions. So it more seems as to be a political agreement than as a plan to really support the economic and the social recovery within Belgium. And in relation to what we have presented, we had some questions to the EU level, as within this conference we have the possibility to speak directly to members of the intergroup and representatives of the European Commission. And for the intergroup, we specifically had a question with regard to the European Pillar of Social Rights, because we are already waiting for a long time for the implementation of it. It has been adopted in 2017. We are eagerly looking forward to the implementation plan, which should be the proposal, at least from the Commission, should be launched within a month. And we were actually wondering what the intergroup will do to support a strong implementation plan based on the proposal of the Commission. With regard to the Commission, we also had some questions with regard to the follow-up of the Council conclusions on minimum income, because as we all know, the EBSCO Council, the member states in the EBSCO Council, under the leadership of the German presidency, have taken important recommendations and conclusions with regard to minimum income, amongst others that the framework on minimum income from the Commission should be updated. And of course, for us, as we already know that for a long time, there have been soft measures from the EU on minimum income, but we see, looking at the results, for instance, of Europe 2020, that it hasn't been enough. So we really hope that there will be a strong legislative initiative and a binding directive on this. And we were wondering, after the Council conclusions, what has happened and which initiatives have been taken by the Commission. With regard to the recovery and resilience, we would also like to ask the Commission to ensure that at the national level, anti-poverty organizations and civil society organizations are included in the discussion, and that for social inclusion, that member states come up with an actual vision for the recovery and the rebuilding of the economic and social texture of our societies. And still, this is a question we already have for a long time. And yeah, we don't hear anything about it anymore, but I want to put it on the table again. There is the end of the Europe 2020 strategy. We see in Belgium there has been no progress. In other countries there has been some progress, but we didn't reach the poverty targets. And especially now that we're in a time of crisis, we think we can really benefit from the learnings and an evaluation from the Europe 2020 strategy. So we were wondering what is happening with that. And also the crisis has shown this once more. We urgently need to have an anti-poverty strategy. So we were also interested to hear more news on that. Thanks very much. I'll give the floor now to Helder again.
Thank you very much, Caroline and Noélie, for your participation, your contribution, bringing us a little bit of what is the reality in Belgium, but also putting into perspective these questions regarding European social policy and strategies to fight poverty and social exclusion. Also highlighting not just the present consequences of the pandemic over the most vulnerable of our societies, but also the future ones, as for example, the issues regarding over-indebtedness or the mental and physical health issues that are suddenly probably being postponed to a later stage, and at an aggregated level will surely have a significant impact on how we're going to address it. I would pass now the floor to the last speaker in this session, last but not least, the representative of the International Federation of Social Workers, Fran McDonald. Fran, please.
Hello, hello everybody. Such rich presentations, so I hope I can follow it with some more general points, I guess, from the International Federation of Social Workers. Many of the points that have come out in our reports are very similar and endorse what the previous speakers have said. So as I go through, I'll try and pick out some of the other points, and at the end I've got some conclusions about, I think, what Daniela referred to, that there are systemic problems, and that we need to address these across all the issues that have been talked about. So just to introduce my organisation, the International Federation of Social Work is a global organisation with 5 regions. And the IFSW Europe region is an NGO which represents social work associations from 50 countries, including all EU states. It's the first time we've been able to produce a report for EAPN, and we were very pleased that 12 countries responded to the questionnaire. Social workers work with people experiencing the impact of COVID-19, individuals, families and communities, and from childhood to older age. People who are all facing poverty, often without access to social services. And our report is a summary of members' feedback, which focused on poverty and the impact on services. This is a summary of what we felt were the main issues coming out of our report, and I think other people have talked about this, that the pandemic is exposing cracks that have been in the healthcare and social welfare systems for years, I think probably since 2009, when austerity was introduced. More marketisation of services and general underfunding with serious consequences of health, social and economic inequalities. The chronic underfunding and lack of recognition of the importance of adequate social services and social protection systems has left many people without the resources, protection and support they need. Sorry. And this was before COVID, but now there have been severe increases in people experiencing illness, unemployment, poverty and family stress. In addition to that, the organisational structure of health and social care services varies widely between countries, but social care is often treated as a separate and unequal system. And this has resulted in a shocking number of excess deaths of older people in care homes, the disregard for health and safety of care staff, and the isolation of older and people with disabilities in their homes. Also, the lack of funding and access to support systems, social care and health services means that people receive too little help too late to prevent problems like child and vulnerable adult abuse, domestic violence, mental health issues, homelessness, and people end up in institutional care because they don't have access to the support they require to maintain or regain their independence. The next couple of slides are about specific issues identified by most social work associations, and other colleagues have talked about these. So the huge increase in poverty and unemployment, particularly those already in low paid jobs, women and young, affecting women and young people particularly, and people with disabilities. The lack of access to social services, services and safety nets, which were stretched anyway, were unavailable, services were closed, and this led to an increase in isolation, mental health and safeguarding issues. In bold there are some of the comments that we've had from particular countries. Closure of schools put huge pressure on families and left vulnerable children at risk, and many harms have been hidden from view, including domestic violence. Digital inequality affected access to education, social services and benefits. For us as social workers, instead of having face-to-face contact with people, we had to see people by digital means, but this created problems. For example, the poorest families, people with learning disabilities, many elderly people, migrants, do not always have the financial means for digital contact or the experience of using it. I think another key issue that needs to be focused on is that Black, Asian and ethnic minority people were disproportionately affected by death, illness, loss of jobs, and with overrepresentation in lower paid jobs, with many Black, Asian and minority ethnic people working in the health sector, and care staff were disproportionately affected by COVID-19. Some of you may have seen today, there was actually a report that came out from Manchester University, which was a study of 1.4 million people. And it's shown that Black and minority ethnic people suffer from severe health inequalities and different layers of disadvantage, with insufficient support from local services such as housing and social care. I think all our associations talked about homelessness and poor quality housing, both the problems of people already living on the streets, but also overcrowding, housing insecurity and homelessness are among causes of unprecedented rises in number of children referred to social workers because of safeguarding concerns and the rise of children coming into care. People living on the streets have lost access to the systems regardless of age, and although measures have been taken to suspend evictions, now that time has passed, this is now being resumed. The number of people is rising. So measures that were put in place to help homeless people are now being withdrawn, and the situation is getting worse. Also, the plight of refugees and migrants who have become more vulnerable, particularly people in camps and those reliant on NGOs where there is no access at the moment. People are dealing with a hostile environment and violations of human rights. So they're not actually even getting minimum protections. So what can we do? What should change? And I think in the chat there was reference to the UN rapporteur on poverty press conference this morning, and he mentioned this first point, which is crucially transformative social protection systems for all and preventative social services need to be seen as an investment in society and not a cost. And I just can't emphasize that more highly. And I think that needs to underpin all the developments that we're talking about today. Also, the European Pillar of Social Rights must be seen as an instrument to eliminate poverty, social exclusion and discrimination. We believe for effective recovery from COVID-19 and to address poverty, we need to integrate the Pillar of Social Rights so that it underpins all the new EU strategies, frameworks, plans and funding, including the new Green Deal and digital transformation. We need to have environmental justice and digital equality, and the pillar should underpin those huge areas of funding as much as the other frameworks. And again, I think the rapporteur mentioned this, we need to have a greater focus and be clear about what this should look like. We need to know what our targets are, we need to have smart outcomes, and we need to know how to achieve it based on human rights principles, with participation, accountability and non-discrimination. We need to implement the child guarantee for children, but also for their families, including access to social services. And I was very sorry that Daniela had who spoke earlier, wasn't able to get the help that she needed from social services. And we have to find a way of supporting families to access their entitlements. We have to provide adequate social housing for all and combat homelessness with fair access to resources for migrants and refugees. And we need to include those sorts of targets in country CSRs, and they have, I think countries have to know that their funding is dependent on meeting these targets. We have to invest in community-based social services, strengthen neighbourhood cohesion and new social partnerships with the participation of people experiencing poverty, or what we call experts by experience, who've used services and involve them in developing them. I think what the pandemic has taught us is the power of joint social action, and we need to take that forward. The last two are about social services, and we strongly recommend developing long-term, having a long-term sustainable strategy and funding model to improve access to universal quality social services and investment in workers and carers. And we need to take into account the increasing need caused by the pandemic, as many of my colleagues have described, because things are going to get worse before they get better, I think. And then finally, is a plea from our sector that social services should be deemed essential to the implementation of the social pillar and for cohesive and resilient societies. And we ask that it should be included in Principle 20, access to essential services. Many of the problems that people experienced during the pandemic were made worse because people couldn't access essential services. So I think we need to take very concrete measures, and we need to have a new strategy to eradicate poverty based on all these points. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran, for your presentation, and thank you all the members and the representatives of our national networks that brought their experiences in the ground to this event to share their knowledge regarding the everyday lives and problems felt and experienced by people in poverty and social exclusion, but also the challenges that we currently face in terms of social policy and the development of effective measures to tackle the problems, not just for now, but in the future, and plan strategically and address considering the specific vulnerabilities of different groups that are more vulnerable in our societies. And I will, of course, proceed to our next session and now give the floor to Katarina Ivankovic-Knezevic, Director of Social Affairs from DG Employment, to share with us how will the action plan for the European social rights, other EU initiatives like the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the European semester, how can help the current poverty trends we see at the European level. Katarina, please.
Thank you very much, Helder, and good afternoon to all. I have to say it was a real pleasure to listen to all of you, to listen to all of you sharing your testimonies. I think this has always been the biggest strength of you as the organization, because you managed to bring people together, and the policymaker and those who really have lived through the difficult times, in order to show how through working together and through the synergies things could be done. I have to say, just before I go into the discussion on the action plan on the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights and many other points that you have rightly pointed out, really to thank you all, and I will take some of the messages with me and share it with my colleagues as well. Especially, I have to say, I got really impressed by Daniela's story, and this is the story of many women, I would say, in the EU, how single mothers and single parents have to live through very difficult times at certain moments. And I'm also very happy that Fran referred to the child guarantee in her presentation, and I'm happy to show you and to share with you what is here on the table and what do we plan to do with the child guarantee. But I'm sure that it can help. It can help a lot in reducing, before everything, the poverty of children, but also securing the equal opportunity, which I believe is the ultimate goal, and it should be ultimate aim of all of us. Also, I have to say a very interesting remark made by Caroline, and on various topics, Caroline, but one was really interesting for me, and this is about the budget. When you said the budget, when it comes to the Belgian budget you were referring, it is a lot of money, but unfortunately it is not sufficient money. I have to say this is my impression as well when we speak about EU funding, because we really speak about the amazing figures, but we are also at the same time fully aware that these figures are not sufficient to resolve all of our problems. And therefore, I will try to show you where we thought that we might find a solution and that we might find the way how to deal with it. Also, congratulations for issuing a report. Very well done, very good read. Me and my colleagues took really a deep insight into the report, and I believe you mentioned and many references are there to our work, like let's just mention some, like the findings of the joint employment report and the concerns that we both shares, and what we also learned in the speech of Ms. Franson. It was also visible the same concerns, and these are those referring to the in-work poverty, especially those at precarious jobs, I have to say, on the situation of people living with disabilities or health problems, including also elderly living alone or residential care. I believe extremely exacerbated by the COVID-19 and extremely showing the weaknesses of all the systems. And Fran touched upon a bit the social services in her presentation. I believe it shows all the weaknesses of as well of the different social services, not only for those relevant to the persons with disabilities or elderly or residential care or healthcare in the end, but all the social services are in problems when it comes in serious problems when it comes to COVID. Also, in joint employment report, we speak a lot about families living in poverty, those with children, but exactly as Daniela pointed out, in particular, single parent households. And single parents and children living in a single parent households face additional challenges. Children also face super extra challenges when it comes to the educational difficulties that they all face. Families living in poverty face the challenges relevant to not having sufficient number of IT devices or not having the internet connection. So the opportunities for children were really, I would say, endangered. And also those living in various vulnerable situations like homelessness or those being marginalized or facing the discrimination. But we have to say that when discussing those who are falling in poverty, we must not forget the young people, because their life is really heavily impacted by the uncertainties of the economic situation and really vague and foggy future perspectives. So what is the situation in the Europe today? If before the onset of the COVID-19, the numbers of people at risk of poverty and social exclusion were declining for, I believe, 7 consecutive years. It was all until 2019. But so we speak about 7 consecutive years, but we all have to remember that from 2008 till 2012, we had a huge increase of people living in poverty. And I believe our Slovenian colleague showed it so well on her graph, and the Belgian colleague as well. And the numbers that were on the decrease, now we will see when the new data come out, what are going to be figures for 2020 and what are going to be final figures for 2019. And these figures of the 7 consecutive years, they of course don't capture the effects of the COVID-19. As the joint employment report and your assessment point out, the important challenges remained even prior to the crisis concerning the similar group of vulnerable people who were hit most by the crisis. And there I already mentioned the child poverty or invert poverty or situation of persons living with disabilities or long-term unemployed and their poverty level, and also those with a migrant background and women, and as repeatedly we speak about single parents. The European Pillar of Social Rights, as rightly pointed out, has been our social agenda since 2017, the end of 2017. And yes, our efforts to focus around the pillar and of our focus around fighting poverty is not only on the job creation and economic growth, but it's also about the social justice, it's also about reducing income inequalities and on securing the upward so-called social mobility. The essence of the pillar could be summarized in investing in people is investing in the future, and the social dimension is needed to create the resilient economy and sustainable growth. And if we forget these lovely words, but if we really try to put it in the real life, we can be absolutely certain that without strong social dimension, there couldn't be a creation of the strong and resilient economy, because the divide is going to be even deeper, and the path that those experiencing poverty will have to climb is going to be even steeper. So in this respect, if this would not be the focus or of our actions, we would be really facing further inequalities, which we all do not want to see being there and being in place. So the 20 pillar principles, I believe everybody knows about 20 pillar principles, and the most interesting part for you is to see and to learn a bit about the action plan. And the action plan for the implementation of the pillar is soon to be adopted from the Commission side. The planning we are finalizing. Well, you know that the whole last year we had intensive rounds and rounds of the discussion within the member states, in the different fora, with the civil society. Many of you took a part in the consultation process as well, with the local and regional authorities, in the Committee of Regions, in the Economic and Social Committee, with different committees in the European Parliament. I believe this really was one of the largest consultation process in last 10 years, if I may say so. More than 1,300 comments and contributions from different stakeholders received, and the final version is being prepared as we speak, actually. And we plan that it will be endorsed by the member states at the social summit under the Portuguese presidency. I believe you are going to see it sooner, of course, after the Commission adopts, but there might be still some slight changes depending, of course, on the contributions and on the positions of the member states. And in the end, the member states are called upon to endorse the action plan. To tackle just some of the initiatives that you are aware that are either ongoing or have been already implemented within the pillar and are integral part, let's say, of the action plan. Definitely the minimum wage initiative, which is the key measure, if I may say so, against the in-work poverty. And we have been advocating a lot, and we have been saying that adequate minimum wages have been shown to really reduce in-work poverty. And we are very much looking forward to the negotiations over the announced directive. Some of the stakeholders consider us extremely over ambitious. Some of the stakeholders think that we are under ambitious, and I believe to strike the good balance within the council is going to be challenging. And many of you are very much aware of the political situation and the political understanding of the various member states in this respect. Also, we have put in place new and reinforced youth guarantee. What is a good step forward, that it's really addressing young people up to 29 in the most vulnerable situations. And it really provides the solid guidance towards a stable labor market integration. The new European Skills Agenda that was launched in July last year has really the whole set of measures and actions and ambitious and quantified targets when it comes to the education and skills and upskilling. Also, we are going to see in the action plan on the pillar what are going to be further steps in this respect. Some of you have mentioned persons with disability. I'm very proud to announce that in less than 20 days, I hope, and we keep fingers crossed, the new European strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities is going to be adopted. It is going to be, I like to call it an ambitious strategy, but I'm looking forward for your comments and after the adoption. But the new strategy will take on board, again, 10-year period, which has proven to be a good element of the previous strategy. And it will cover for the first time all the principles and all the articles of UN Convention on the Rights of the Persons with Disabilities, and be with strong access to accessibility, to inclusion in the society, to the inclusion at the labor market, and to all of the other aspects that are really relevant for the life of the persons with disabilities. Of course, health, and also you will see a new and renewed part of us as the Commission and our commitments how to lead by example in implementing the convention. Just to mention you a few of the other strategies, could you please just let me know, because we are completely out of time, just how much more time do I have? Colleagues from the EAPN, maybe. Helder, maybe you can just write in the chat, or... Hello.
$5 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Perfect, thanks. So I wanted to tell you that many other Commission strategies and many action plans have taken on board this anti-poverty element. Just to mention those already adopted under the EU Union of Equality, the Anti-Racism Action Plan or EU Roma Strategic Framework, a very important and very relevant action plan on integration and inclusion of the migrants, and also the latest adopted strategy under the Union of Equality, the LGBTIQ equality strategy, and also previously in the beginning of the year, in the beginning of the 2020 adopted gender equality strategy. To let you know a bit about our own initiatives, and when already mentioned, the European Child Guarantee is going to be adopted at a Commission level together with the EU strategy on the rights of the child or children. I believe that's the end of the Q1, so the end of March, when we can expect the adoption at the EU level. What is Child Guarantee going to bring new? Child Guarantee is going to put a focus on the children in need and their access to the services. We would like to secure effective access, and depending on the level of the ambition, of course, as well, and again, of the level of the ambition, we will see what are we going to negotiate and what is going to be free and what is going to be the effective access. But the services that we are addressing are early childcare and education, out of school activities, especially those linked to the or implemented within the school premises, and health, nutrition, and housing. Children in need, in accordance with the political guidelines, and maybe some of you remember the political guidelines of the President von der Leyen, where she states that every child at the risk of poverty and social exclusion should have an access to basic services such as health and education. We of course broaden it based on also on our pilot projects in the area of child guarantee, and we also identified certain groups of children who are in need of our further support. So definitely children at risk of poverty and social exclusion, but also children with disabilities, children from the precarious households, migrant children, children living in the institutions, and children belonging to some national minorities, such as Roma children. And we would like really to have the child guarantee as a push towards creating more and better national policies relevant for children, especially the children in need. And I'm very happy that I can share with you that yesterday the discussion, the negotiations on the ESF Plus were finalized, and we have a political agreement that says that for the member states, for 11 member states, definitely, and for the others, depending on their will, they will have to secure a certain amount for the children in need. And this will be 5% of the ESF Plus allocation. And there might be of course, an additional reflection on how to use the EU funding. And what we have been saying, and those of you who took a part in the consultation process know it well, we see EU funding, and just in line, as Caroline says, it's a lot of money, but not enough. We see EU funding triggering the national funding in this respect. Towards the end, just to mention, yes, also maybe the Council recommendation on the access to social protection is very important. And it's very important that that the monitoring framework with the member states would be essential to identify gaps and the challenges in this respect. I would also maybe just like to refer in the end to housing and essential services, as they are part of the pillar, and they're going to be a part of the action plan. In the area of, and of course, fully having in mind the competencies that we share, the competencies that member states have, and the competencies that EU have in this respect. And what has been already shared by our commissioner a lot, we plan to invest lots of efforts into addressing the homelessness. We plan to launch the platform on the eradication of the homelessness with the political aim on really reaching maximum close to zero number of homeless people in our member states. We are, of course, fully realistic what is possible and how the member states react, but we believe that it is a time to step up the discussion in this respect and to see how we all, from our different angles, the member states with their own responsibilities, Commission with what we can do within our own responsibilities, and then the civil society, the whole civil society, what they can do at their own level. I'm not touching upon the semester and the RRF, maybe because we are really running out of time, and I would maybe like to hear your thoughts and ideas. But I would like to encourage you to use all of your available channels to motivate the national authorities and to motivate the member state level into addressing the social policy in the area relevant of the social policy. We have seen that in the last round of discussions, the European Parliament has put a big accent on the social policy and the social area, including also some horizontal aspects like equality, and the new guidelines to the member states were issued. But I can tell you also that in practice, we still see lots of hiccups from our side as well. So not only from your side and not only from your experience, but also from the various other angles, there are hiccups, and still lots of discussion needs to be done. I believe for the member states it's not an easy task, because they have to combine the RRF, they have to still work on the REACT-EU, which is the prolongation of the almost like a prolongation of the previous financial package. And they need to work on the programming of the new ESF Plus and the rest of the cohesion. So it is really not an easy task. So I would stop here. I'm still ready to, and I still have some time to stay with you and to listen to your questions. So please, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katarina. We proceed now for the next section, for the open discussion with the audience. Of course, this is a Zoom event, and that means we ask participants to place their questions in the chat. We picked up some remarks during the participations, the contributions of all the speakers, and of course, also a few questions, and Caroline from the Belgian Anti-Poverty Network also addressed very specific questions to the intergroup in the European Parliament, as well as in the European Commission, and in this case to Katarina. Here she can probably address them. I would try to summarize, and I know Katarina has also some limited time to share with us, but I would try to summarize two questions that I think they are particularly important, and they've been focused in some of the remarks. First, how the ongoing agenda that we had, focusing, for example, in adequate income, the minimum income, is going to be to continued and integrated into the new policy developments, for example, in terms of resilience, recovery and resilience plans, for example, into the action plan for the European Pillar of Social Rights. One particular question that we got was if there will be an obligation or a guidance to the member states to develop action plans of their own in terms of implementing the European social rights. And I will start by these two, Katarina.
Yes, okay, it's fine now. Good. So, well, you have put plenty of the questions into one question, I have to say, I also do not have necessarily all the replies that you might wish I would have, but nevertheless, on the RRF and the national reform and resilience programs, I have to say that I truly believe, and I hope, and especially if these changes that have been proposed are going to remain as such, that we will have a strong investment in the social policy. And when I say social policy, you know, I take it as wide: employment, education, skills, and social inclusion. What is very visible is that the consequences of the COVID are going to eat most of the RRPs. In the terms of job preservation, in the terms of different short work schemes that have been put in place, but also in the light of maybe addressing the various health challenges. And we know that health part is going to be the biggest part in the RRFs, in the RRPs. What is a good thing, I have to say, is that we are negotiating based on the country-specific recommendations from 2019 and 2020, where we have a really good and really clear, and you know it quite well because EAPN has been always very active in assessing the CSRs as well, where we really address the main challenges in the member states, from the minimum income, from the various other aspects, including well, maybe not so much in 2020, but in 2019 also the sustainability of the pension systems. And then all of you know in 2020, the health systems took the majority of the country-specific recommendations, trying to build up the resilience of the whole system. So what my colleagues are doing is really putting the social very high. We open it and we discuss it at each and every meeting, and let's see and let's wait. Of course, now if the regulation would be adopted as it is now, then we will have a strong social aspect and strong social concept. What is also visible that the member states take a different pace and they work differently. So some of the member states only have prepared the parts of the RRPs. Some of the member states have undertaken negotiations with the relevant stakeholders, but only in some elements. So there is still on work in progress, I would say, and I was there to say in this respect. So that would be the part on the RRP. On the action plan, our commission and the document as it will be adopted, the communication on the action plan, will show where the accent should be given in the whole 20 principles. And I think it would be very visible for you how we take each and every pillar principle on board. Of course, as you know, the principles are grouped differently in the pillar, and we have tried to put also the logic units and the logic system in grouping the different actions. And the member states will have to implement, of course, and the member states are going to contribute, but also through the different means. And we are not putting in front of them that all of them have to have action plan for the implementation of the action plan, because that would be going away too much. But there are elements where we ask for additional strategic documents to be prepared. We all know about the recommendation on the social protection, and the member states will have to deliver their action plan how to implement the recommendation on the social protection by May this year. Or in the area I can share with you with the child guarantee, we also plan here to ask the member states to implement and to prepare the action plans, how they want to implement the child guarantee. The new and enabling conditions for the use of the EU funds are also putting member states in the position that they have to have the strategic documents. And you know that we do not tell you need to have the strategy on the rights of the persons with disabilities, but you need to have, or overall anti-poverty strategy or overall children's strategy, but they need to have the strategic overview. How they want to do it, it's of course up to them, and it will be up to us to assess if they have put everything in place. Thanks.
Thank you, Katarina. I would say, is it possible to address the second question? We still count a little bit on your time?
Yes, I can.
Okay, well, one of the issues and the several remarks focused was also on the role of the participation of civil society organizations in the draw up, sometimes the assessment of policy, into the evaluation of the programs that are going to be rolled down at the European national level. And also, how can these new programs also pay attention to specific vulnerable groups? You addressed, for example, the example of Roma, disability, homelessness. Let's say if you consider, for example, migrants or asylum seekers, is there a role in these new programs in social policies to address and target also these migrant groups? And is there a role for the participation of civil society organizations and the people experiencing poverty and social exclusion in the future implementation of the plans?
Well, you know my reply, it's very simple. For us, this is the crucial point. We have the conduct on partnerships. We have clearly stated everywhere, and we clearly discussed this with the member states. For us, the implementation of the code of conduct is inclusion of the civil society and the social partners into the process of consultation, discussion, preparation of the documents, and then implementation. So this is for me, this is very simple question and simple reply. What is not so simple is that we see that different member states have a different approach. I believe there is no room for interpretation of the code of conduct because it's quite clear. And it's quite straightforward. And what I can say is that we are assessing if this principle is being implemented. And this is also part of our checklist during the negotiation process. And we always point and we always push towards the fact that we have to take on board and we have to take care for those who are in the process. And I'm really, it doesn't make me feel particularly happy when I see that we have a certain hiccups. And I'm really hoping that this is due to maybe not everyone being fully on board with the new programs and with the variety now of the programs. And maybe some believe that including the civil society, let's say, in the discussion on the future OPs, does mean that they do not have to be included in the RRF discussion or something else, but it is something that we are going to assess, and we always take it very seriously, because for us this is extremely important element of every negotiations.
Thank you, Katarina. I'm going to pick up now a question that Caroline placed to the intergroup. And the question specifically was in which regard the intergroup can support the strong implementation plan for the European Pillar of Social Rights after the proposal is known from the European Commission. I would address it to Marisa.
And Helder, I will just say goodbye, because I unfortunately I have to leave, but thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for inviting us, and just congratulations once again on the excellent report and on your good work that you are doing all these years, and now it is now crucial, more crucial maybe than ever before.
Thank you very much, Katarina.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Sorry, Marisa.
Yes, no problem. I was with my video disconnected in order to have a better quality of the session. I don't know if do I answer in English or in Portuguese?
We can answer in Portuguese. We have the translation to English, French.
Ok, so I'll do it in Portuguese. Bem, obrigada, antes de mais, pelas perguntas. Eu estou de máscara porque estou aqui ao lado do Sérgio Aires e estamos os dois no mesmo espaço, então estamos os dois de máscara a assistir ao webinar. Enfim, em relação a esta pergunta em concreto, sobre o papel do intergrupo em relação à implementação do Pilar Social Europeu, o intergrupo, como sabem, é composto por deputados e deputadas de diferentes grupos parlamentares, e há um trabalho todo que fazemos individualmente nas diferentes comissões parlamentares em que estamos, que vai muito em linha com a política de cada um desses grupos parlamentares. Agora, o papel do intergrupo e a força do intergrupo está precisamente em nós conseguirmos ter uma posição coletiva que procure traduzir a posição do Parlamento, digamos assim, para além do trabalho legislativo que é feito e de implementação. E desse ponto de vista, nós vamos tomando posição e iremos monitorizando a implementação do pilar social à medida que for acontecendo e, obviamente, emitindo opinião e dando recomendações a esse respeito. O que não substitui é o trabalho que temos que fazer em cada uma das comissões parlamentares no quadro da nossa atividade como deputados e deputadas, mas isso falo-emos seguramente em diálogo com as associações, com as organizações que estão no terreno, que trabalham as questões relacionadas com o combate à pobreza e como sempre fizemos, e por isso entendam o intergrupo como uma forma também de poderem expressar as vossas preocupações e as vossas experiências à medida que a implementação for acontecendo, e nós faremos o nosso trabalho de dar voz e de dar eco no Parlamento a essas preocupações.
Thank you very much, Marisa, for your answer. I don't know if we have more questions to Marisa or to the intergroup, let's say. Okay, so we are almost reaching our intended time. I would, before giving the floor to Marisa for the closing remarks of the event, I would just remind all the participants that we have an evaluation form in the chat, and they could use it also to evaluate this event and give us their feedback for us to improve the events that we develop at this level, also benefiting from your suggestions and contributions. And with further ado, I would pass the floor to Marisa, which is from the member of the European Parliament and Vice Chair of the Intergroup, to present the closing remarks for the event. Thank you, Marisa.
Obrigada mais uma vez, obrigada por este webinar, que foi muito importante e muito interessante. Quero aproveitar para cumprimentar a todos e a todas, incluindo o cão da Paula. Eu gosto muito de cães também, portanto achei o máximo que ele tivesse entrado. Dito isto, nós sabemos muito bem como a pandemia teve um impacto real na vida de toda a gente, todos os cidadãos e cidadãs da União Europeia, e a forma como esse impacto foi desproporcional. E é sempre, e sem exceção, também foram os grupos mais pobres e vulneráveis que foram mais afetados por esta crise pandémica que estamos a viver, e em particular pessoas com deficiência, pessoas doentes, crónicas, pessoas em situação de emprego precário, mães e pais solteiros, pessoas sem abrigo, comunidades ciganas e, transversalmente, como acontece em quase todas as crises e todas as situações de desigualdade, afetando mais as mulheres. Infelizmente, sabemos que este impacto que conhecemos até agora não é o impacto total, que ele irá agravar-se à medida que o tempo for passando e que seguramente e infelizmente vai ainda cavar mais fundo as desigualdades que temos, desigualdades que já eram absurdas no período pré-Covid-19, que agora se tornam ainda mais evidentes, e por isso estes momentos, e este momento em particular que estamos a viver, convoca-nos para a urgência, que é termos de mudar de paradigma no que diz respeito à organização das nossas sociedades e em particular do modelo económico em que vivemos. Precisamos, desse ponto de vista, de um compromisso claro, um compromisso político claro da Comissão Europeia e dos Estados-membros, no sentido de fortalecer os direitos sociais e de colocar as pessoas em primeiro lugar na recuperação pós-Covid-19 e não de repetir a receita que já vivemos na sequência da crise de 2008, que foi uma receita desastrosa, com políticas de austeridade que foram aplicadas e cujos resultados foram um absoluto desastre. Também não podemos permanecer só na declaração de intenções e na definição de princípios, porque não aguentamos falhar nas políticas de recuperação uma segunda vez em tão pouco tempo. É, por isso, muito importante, e eu creio que este é o momento em que jogamos muita da credibilidade da União Europeia e da legitimidade da própria União Europeia perante os cidadãos europeus, essa legitimidade e essa credibilidade joga-se na capacidade ou não que existe para criar uma Europa social e solidária e também para salvarmos em conjunto, todos e todas, a democracia que, como sabemos, está em causa neste preciso momento. Por isso é urgente voltar a colocar as decisões políticas nas mãos de quem legitimamente representa o povo e precisamos também que os governos recuperem e que os países individualmente recuperem a soberania que necessitam para nos libertarmos da financiarização das nossas vidas, que tem determinado tantos dos problemas que vivemos. Neste contexto, os Poverty Watches, que são muito úteis, agradeço profundamente, porque são documentos, são elementos que nos ajudam a ir muito para além das evidências estatísticas e que nos ajudam a sermos capazes de qualificar a informação que normalmente obtemos pela via estatística. E são experiências concretas que nos são mostradas, experiências concretas de pessoas em situação de pobreza e também que nos mostram a necessidade de reforçar os rendimentos adequados de várias formas. Ouvi durante este seminário dizer, e bem, partilho completamente, que há mecanismos de apoio que são muito importantes, como os rendimentos de inserção, mas a sua capacidade para retirar pessoas da pobreza é muito limitada e por isso temos que trabalhar em todos os rendimentos e em particular na criação de emprego e em salários dignos, porque aí sim podemos conseguir ter condições para retirar as pessoas da situação de pobreza. E não nos podemos esquecer de termos que melhorar o acesso aos serviços essenciais e de continuar a lutar permanentemente contra a exclusão e contra a discriminação. Nos tempos de Covid, da pandemia que estamos a viver, há dimensões da exclusão social que se agravaram e que algumas delas até se tornaram novas formas de exclusão, como é o caso da exclusão digital. Vemos qual é a dificuldade de fazer aulas à distância, das crianças que não podem assistir ou que não têm meios para poder assistir às aulas, ou que não têm os recursos necessários para poder fazer. Vemos também como a digitalização dos serviços essenciais nas nossas sociedades exclui tantas pessoas, muitas pessoas mais velhas que não conseguem aceder a serviços essenciais, pessoas mais pobres, e a outra forma de exclusão que se agravou e discriminação está muito relacionada com a pobreza energética, com esta necessidade que temos de estar mais em casa, toda a gente, para se proteger e proteger os outros, mas percebermos que muitas das pessoas, ao estarem todo o tempo em casa, não têm condições para aquecer a sua própria casa ou para pagar as despesas associadas a isso. Por isso, espero sinceramente e esperamos que o plano de ação da Comissão Europeia sobre o pilar social europeu seja corajoso e que seja verdadeiramente um plano de ação que saia da linha dos princípios e das declarações que temos tido. Esperamos que este plano inclua instrumentos jurídicos e calendários e metas muito claras. Mas ainda esperamos mais da Comissão Europeia e esperamos que a Comissão Europeia elabore uma estratégia europeia de combate à pobreza, onde tenha também objetivos claros e ambiciosos para reduzir a pobreza e que contenha propostas claras e concretas para que essa redução da pobreza seja uma realidade. Nunca foi tão urgente agir estrategicamente e de forma coordenada no combate à pobreza, e é mais do que tempo de reconhecermos que o crescimento económico que tivemos nos últimos 30 anos não só não foi capaz de erradicar a pobreza, como não conseguiu produzir níveis de desigualdade, como conseguiu produzir níveis de desigualdade inimagináveis e que são absolutamente insustentáveis. Nós estamos a lidar com novas formas de pobreza, com aumento da pobreza, num contexto já de pobreza insustentável e inaceitável, antes mesmo da pandemia. Por isso, o crescimento económico dos últimos 30 anos que nós tivemos não foi um crescimento que tenha produzido riqueza, produziu antes ricos. E o que nós queremos não é um crescimento desta natureza, o que queremos é desenvolvimento, mas um desenvolvimento que seja social e sustentável para todos e para todas. E desse ponto de vista, agradeço muito o vosso trabalho que nos ajuda a poder fazer o nosso melhor e ainda com mais força. Muito obrigada.
Thank you, Marisa, for your closing remarks. I think it's very important the way we highlighted and you highlighted the challenge that we face in the future, and specifically the cracks this current pandemic situations expose regarding our social protection systems and the services, and the underfunding of services, and the vulnerabilities within the agenda of the digital transition. Thank you very much for wrapping up the event for us in a way that actually brings all the discussions and many of the issues together. I would like, of course, just to wrap up the event. Thank you everybody for attending. Thank also for our interpreters that assured that the translation was there for us to